Welcome, everybody. Another episode of the Mids Watch. I am Ryan, and you're going to love this episode. We are going over a ton of concepts with a great example from something that's probably more applicable than I'd like to admit. Religious people taking the red pill. And it's a weird situation. Like, case in point, there's actually like a Christianity red-pilled subreddit. Started by a guy, Red Curious, a divorce lawyer, very switched on guy, but really didn't get it as far as a red pill. And they've, for the most part, spent a majority of their time trying to like force fit Bible scripture into the stuff that we talk about, the praxeologies of the red pill. And these are one of those examples where you're going to find your religion and your own self-interest are not going to align, and you just need to keep that stuff separate. As per the norm, we have a field report of a guy talking about his 1.5 months of trying to unplug. And typical, come in, drop your life down on a piece of paper. Here, guys, here's my shit show of a life, and what do I do with it? And then he'll get a bunch of feedback. He'll argue with people in the chat or just agree with them, and then he goes away and we never hear from him again. So while I cannot pull the original quote from this, luckily enough, there's been enough quoted and referenced stuff from his field report that we're able to piece together his report. And it's a couple things. Working on himself, half read through most of the books, the When I Say No, I Feel Guilty, assertiveness training, the No More Mr. Nice Guy, and the, shedding of codependent nice guy behaviors, halfway through the Rational Male. Like, how Rich Cooper, he always used to say, like, 6 feet tall, 6-figure salary, 6-inch dick, 6-pack abs. This guy's like 3 on everything. Half-ass this, half-ass that, half-ass the other thing. Makes me laugh. Anyways, so just know, in general, he has as his self-proclaimed like porn addiction, video game addiction, some other addiction. I don't know, maybe drinking. I can't remember. We'll get into it at the end there. He's acting more red-pilled. His wife's calling him a smug asshole. And now he's a little confused. He's like, I don't get it. I'm following the roadmap and things aren't really going. So I'm starting to have second thoughts. I thought I'd get your guys' thoughts. Jack starts it off like with his quote, like, week 3. I started getting bitter and my tone changed, but I wouldn't realize it till week 4. It's like, look, dude, you're religious, right? It's like, you have to realize that a strong religious faith makes it very easy to act like a smug dipshit. Like, think about that smirk on your face when you realize somebody is pushing or pulling the wrong way on a door. Like, the right way is to push the door. You're amused at how completely wrong the other person is, and when they turn around and see that your self-satisfied smirk of amusement you have at the expense of their ignorance, you realize that they probably hate your guts, right? Because they're thinking things like, why the hell wasn't that door labeled more clearly? Why is this asshole smirking at me? Am I the only idiot who made that mistake? And why did I make that mistake? I mean, am I really that dumb not to figure out how to open a door? Now, smug is different than amused. You're amused when you see the guy struggling with the door and you joke around. Yeah, this is why I always push one door and pull the other. That way I'm guaranteed to get it right half the time. And then they laugh and you hold the door open for each other and you're both on your way. No smirk, no reaction on your part saying, it's so obvious what is right and so hilarious how wrong you are. So just realize that between your religion and your red pill reading, you have 2 sources that are suggesting to you that if you just do what they say, you will be very, very right, and a lot of people will be very, very wrong. You will have the answers to how things really are. You'll see a bunch of people pulling doors even though the push sign is now totally obvious, and you're going to be very easy for you to walk around like a smug dipshit. Which is what I love, because he adds next to the guy's quote, there was like, by the grace of God, I started to change. And he goes, there's your problem. But I'm going to pause that because I kind of want to go over this a bit again. Again, I don't think a lot of guys understand amuse mastery. They seem to think it's some kind of, I have the keys to the universe and you're lording them over the other person, like you said, a smug dipshit. And that's not it. God knows there's enough examples right now on the internet of whammon ain't shit. God knows I put a few up on my channel alone because what the hey, we all need to eat, right? Rollo does it, that Myron does it, Rich does it, John does it, everybody does it. It's an example of somebody who's totally wrong and you're a guy who's totally right. And you can look at this guy like a smug dipshit and smirk and laugh. We all do it, I get it. But outside of like infotainment circles, this is absolutely not what you need to be doing on a red pill perspective. Like, this is not a muse mastery. This is just some kind of weird tribal reinforcement mechanism. Again, from a marketing standpoint, totally makes sense. You guys will watch more of these videos if you're assured that everything you're doing is right and everything else from them is wrong. Feminist bad, wham and shit. You great, you alpha male. Love it. Buy my merch. Good on. Go on your day. Now, when you're in a relationship though, like it's not adversarial. Some broad in Miami, nobody gives a shit. You're never going to see her again in your entire life outside of that video. So yeah, hate on it as much as you want. I've never met anybody who's been on the Jerry Springer store or Jerry Springer show. But you can be sure as shit that I've fucking yelled at them on the TV when they're, you are the baby, you're not the baby. And she threw a chair, and it's that show that's great because you actually knew the name of the bouncer. Like, indignation, I get it. In your real life though, again, that's just a way of alienating the people around you. Now, if you are red pilling yourself because you want to have more abundance and you want to have more options, well, then being a smug dipshit to the people around you that may or may not be added value to your life is just a bad way to go about it. And even if they're not, let's say it's some like Karen of all Karens, you want nothing to do with her for the rest of your life. If you're being social, there's an audience. Like, that saying that know what a girl is like by how she treats the waiter? It's like somebody's watching. And so if they see you being a smug dipshit to a horrible Karen-like woman, well, all you've done is you've made it very easy to dismiss you as the asshole and her as the poor downtrodden women. We're all hardwired for that. Now, in that group of friends, there's probably another girl that maybe would have loved to date you or would have loved to hang out with you. And now she's just like, oh, that's that smug asshole that made that fat chick cry last week. I don't think I want anything to do with that. We'll think of examples of guys who do that, but I mean, they're so hot that they can get away with it. And if you're sitting here listening to this stuff, that guy's not you. So just let it go. But put a pin in that. We'll get back on topic here. By the grace of God, I started to change. And I love this. It's like going to be a big talk on agency here. It's like, here's the problem. The only religions I'm broadly familiar with are Christianity and Judaism. Now, highly religious dudes, as far as my Orthodox friends describe it, basically sit around all day and question Judaism. What does this really mean? What is God really saying here? Is this literal or a metaphor? How important is this thing as far as a core Jewish faith prescription goes? And then once you figure out what all that shit means, you debate things like how God intended us to apply this in our lives. How should we instruct other Jews to apply this to their lives? Is this even something that should be taught? Or does everybody need to go through this intellectual exercise for it to be truth faith? So when you apply a thought process like this to a philosophy or a praxeology you come across, it's introspective just enough to ensure you'll never be smug. Like, how could you? You know how much thought you put in to draw your own conclusions, and there isn't really a canonical set of answers to how things really are, but really, just the answers I think are the best ones for how I think things probably are, but they may not be, and I guess we'll just have to see. And that reminds me so much of like Real Zero Dad. He was mentioning like the big problem within the red pill space right now, and we do have like a regression of the mean issue right now. It's like you don't want to swap notes anymore. I just want your notes. You know what I mean? And it's that lack of curiosity and introspection that I think it's on all of us as creators. We're creating a generation. I mean, I should use smaller language. We're creating a small niche group of like very smug, know-it-all, unattractive men. Can't be faulted for it. I mean, we didn't tell you to be unattractive, but that's generally how it's working. Now, whose fault is that? Who cares? Whose responsibility is it not to be that guy? Well, it's yours. It's not mine. As long as you're watching, I'm happy. And that's like the creator content consumer relationships. Just accept it for what it is. Anyways, in other words, there's no totally obvious sign that indicates which direction to push or pull the door, just the direction you think you should push it or pull it. And although you could see why somebody would decide otherwise, you want to stop acting like a smug douche, start thinking like that. Because look, if you want to take all the text in your religious faith as gospel, then sure, your life, your choices, for example, I find it I find it curious, by the way, that your faith is one where your counselor is upset at your father for not judging her, but whatever. I also find it curious that he seems nonplussed by the fact that your wife punching you in the mouth. Oh wow, there was a lot in this report that I missed. So I guess his smug dipshittery got mad enough to punch him in the face, which I'm assuming then is where he got his 2x4 of justice. But I mean, when a girl switches to direct language like that, that's when you know they've run out of other options. But then again, whatever. Seriously, those whatevers are entirely sincere. I'm not being smug, and I'm not being smug because should a father judge his daughter for having a child out of wedlock? Is that the kind of question I'd think about for a while? Like, what does it mean to judge somebody? Is your judgment meaningful if you still otherwise interact with that person as normal? Does forgiveness imply you've stopped judging them? So whatever your counselor's answer, I wouldn't respond all smug and think, your brainwashed religious idiot only thinks that because he believes in the visible sky fairies in the clouds, because I fundamentally recognize that questions and answers about the moral consequences of things like fornication and adultery are entirely subjective, and even if somebody is dead wrong, I could also be exactly as dead wrong, just in a different way. Man, I wish I could pull out what that bit was. So definitely something about a marriage counselor, something about a dad not judging her, probably because they had a kid out of wedlock between the two of them, and him being so smug that she punched him in the mouth. Like, isn't it funny? Like, there's so many steps, so many. If you were like observing the person in front of you, like I always talk about OODA loops, observe, orient, decide, and act, as a way of acting on the world better, as like an iterative process. Like, you have to avoid so many observations to get to that point. I could definitely, because no ass whooping falls out of the sky. There's body language demeanor. There's conversation changes. There is, like, you can usually tell when somebody's going to get ready to throw a punch. It's like police get tons of training on what does it look like when a guy's about to become violent. And you'll see little things like he'll hide behind somebody, put his hand behind his back. He couldn't remember half the girls he had slept with. What was the point if you couldn't remember them? You know, eventually stops talking, just starts giving you the mean mug, all that stuff. But yeah, he missed all of that until he got popped in the nose. Then all of a sudden he starts to realize, oh, maybe I'm not doing this thing right. So if you choose to live your life as a religious moral objectivist, then again, your life and more power to you. But realize this is a terrible approach to the red pill. That you're reading a bunch of text written by mostly anonymous strangers on the internet, and they all write like they have the answers to how things really are, but they don't. They definitely don't have the answers to how things really are in your life, and you should probably place some importance on that. Again, a lot of guys kind of misconstrue this. Like, there's a lot of times where a lot of things come out, and this is why I'm always harping on, don't worry about if red pill is true. Just worry about if it's useful. Again, whether this is true or not is irrelevant. We could be wrong, 100% wrong. As long as the outcomes are good, that's good enough. And that's what he's talking about here with like moral objectivism. That's actually what Christianity and the female mind in general speak of. There is a single moral hierarchy. Things are less moral and things are more moral, but it's a single axis thing. And a lot of the times when you're getting in arguments, either from a religious standpoint, from a feminine standpoint, the argument becomes establishing like a dominance, like who's higher status than the other person, because then that person gets to decide where the morality is. Absolutely funny. It kind of makes sense actually why Christianity went with like a monotheistic God, because then it's like, okay, all of these stupid arguments that basically they can cause wars. Hatfields and McCoys, men versus women, all that. At least they could say, well, Jesus is kind of above all that, so he wins this argument. And it gave people, again, a way to speak in the feminine without having to worry about just like constant infighting. Now you can map Christianity and women together in this however you want. I'm not going to preach it much farther. The point is here, though, just from a red pill perspective, there is no moral objectivism. It's all subjective. If I do something, it could be good for me, it could be bad for me. And it could be good for you and it could be bad for you, but those things aren't related. So for us, from a moral subjective standpoint, if I do something that's good for me and the people I care about, I would consider that morally good. If you do something that's good for you and your family, but bad for me and mine, I would consider that morally bad. But you see what I mean there? It's all focused on that mental point of origin, and God knows, guys like Rollo and me have been blabbing about mental point of origin for 5-6 years now, and everybody still sees it and then still tries to pigeonhole moral objectivism into it, but whatever. Anyway, so he goes like, but dude, red pill? Like whatever answers you think you got from the book of James, you cannot have the same mindset towards any red pill text that you read. You really cannot go into this expressing emotions that you don't even realize you feel, because if you do, you'll be unable to own your shit, because you aren't even letting yourself comprehend your shit, seriously. Just your own post, you said, so some time happened, and I forgot a lot of what happened. Like seriously, are you this incapable of remembering your recent past? I assume you're not sort of Christian denomination that encourages drug use to the point of short-term memory loss, but then again, everything you wrote screams of a person who is so fucking sure he has the answers to how things really are that he never even has to think about whether it's actually true or not. And I understand this sort of goes with the territory for a religion, and even the most contrarian rabbis have to take some religious tech on a mental leap of faith, but this is a terrible way to approach the red pill. Don't take any of this on a leap of faith. A lot of this stuff may seem eye-opening, but just because the core premises jive with you doesn't mean you have to consume everything wholesale. Among other things, I would recommend actually finishing the fucking books. And he mentions here you've done half of When I Say No I Feel Guilty, half of Models, half of Book of Puck, because while religious texts can be read and applied piecemeal, there is no Manson 316 or Rollo 912, Psalm equivalents. Any debates have no arguments from authority. I don't read Latin. Where he says, well, actually, according to the Blue Pill Professor 420, he says the opposite, so you're wrong. Like, the books you read here in this space, and this is something that all of us should keep in mind, me and you. All of the books you read in this space are written by a bunch of random dudes giving advice and suggestions to desperate men in sexless marriages, and they're hoping that they're convincing enough of you guys to pay them for the advice. That's as far as any argument from authority will take you. So realize you can absolutely buy what they're selling if you want, but unlike the Book of James, you should ask yourself if any of the content you read is canonically and broadly applicable, or maybe applicable to some people and not you, or to you and not some people. Whatever you answer, you won't really know if you're right, and that alone will make you very aware of how this advice impacts your life, and in some time, you'll develop your own red pill approach to your own marriage, as we all did. I absolutely love that line, by the way, because it's like, you guys know, it kind of irks me when you see people talk about, red pill's cult, the red pill ideology, or red pill philosophy, and it's like, no, stop trying to pigeonhole some kind of authority, top-down hierarchy in this. This is guys swapping notes. And it's just like an economic model. Like, some models are useful, but no model is accurate. None of this stuff is accurate. It's a bunch of guys who assume we have all the answers, and so we write stuff down. We can jive in with other people, and I've talked about it before, where it's like convergent evidence. The idea is I have a loosey-goosey experiment on my own life where I do this, and sex life improves, or marriage improves, and whatever metrics you want to use, and that works for me. And then, a couple other guys write something that's similar, and it all kind of points in a single direction. That gives every one of those little half-assed, loosey-goosey experiments a little more credibility, because it looks like, look, you can half-ass this, but you're still going to kind of drive in this direction, so just continue to drive in this direction and things will work out. Doesn't always mean it's right. Doesn't mean it's true. It just means that's the best what we've got to go for. And every single guy who's made anything of note has never just done like, here's Rollo's roadmap, and I followed paint by number style to follow my thing. They took all this stuff. Some of it applied, some of it they got mad at. We used to have fights over like the nuances between certain things. And those were good fights because like, look, your moral objectivism thing didn't matter for a lick in my life. Well, actually, I think it did for my life. And that's the fight. When you realize, okay, that's probably not a core thing, but it's all specific to your relationship. So if you're in a devout Christian household, it's probably some moral objectivism thing might make more sense to you because, yeah, you got to put Jesus first. Maybe if you're in a secular household, not so much. But the point is, you need to be self-aware enough to know this. And then by a leap of faith, going back on the other thing here, the guy, Scaramouche 12, I think he called, he actually did have a follow-up to this one, which gives us a nice little capper to it, which I really like. So he responded to the smug dipshit stuff, and he goes, "You're right. I'm a smug dipshit, and a religious veneer only exacerbates it, and it's a terrible way to approach the red pill. But strong faith is grounded by, I don't know the right way to open the door, I need stronger faith." Like, you see what I mean? This guy's the most frustrating guy to talk to. If you guys don't know, what he did there is he did like that art of the deal Trump thing. You agree with somebody and then throw a but in the middle and then say what you were going to say anyway. And that way the other person thinks, oh, you've really been listening to me. Everything that went before the but there, you can just flat out ignore. What he said is, yeah, that strong faith makes it very easy for you to look like a smug dipshit. And the guy's like, yeah, but strong faith is grounded by, I don't know the right way, so I need more. And he goes like, let he is without smugness cast the first stone. That's a joke. But I wonder, is it possible to say you're not smug without being smug? It feels like it's the kind of discourse you ascribe to Orthodox Jews, and I appreciate it. I don't even know what that one means, but like, this is the frustrating part. It's like, you're not talking to a person. You're talking to a guy who's like, as you talk to him, he's trying to process it through the book instead of like listening, applying, parsing, and then seeing, like, you don't see any humility in there. You see like a faux humility. It's like, I don't have to be humble. God's definitely the truth. It's like, he might be right, but you ain't. And then he goes to the part where they were talking about you can't even own your shit if you're not even going to be self-aware about the shit. He goes, yes, I'm incapable and absent-minded. I think this is a Christian thing particularly, by the way, because there's like a glut of guys in here that will do this. They will absolutely double down in the same way that like a kid who got bullied. Like, I'm sure anybody remembers from high school. You remember that kid that used to get bullied? They'd make fun of him and call him names. And then instead of like arguing, the kid would just like agree wholeheartedly. It's like, absolutely, I am a big fucking nerd. Yeah, for sure. It's like one of those, any attention is good attention. And it's like, I don't know, I'd never rubbed me the right way. It's like, if you're calling somebody a smug dipshit, you're not doing that because you want him to smile and agree with you. You're saying that because you want to get a reaction out of him, like to snap him out of his trance. But in this case, he's straight back into it. And he says, like, I'm also a slow writer and I didn't want to write out every inane detail. The big reason for my post was trying to comprehend this stuff. A lot happened in the last month and a half. Writing it out was a serious gut check, like, whoa, I'm lucky to still be married, thank God. Reading these responses is another gut check, and it's difficult to write a response with comprehension in my own shit. Which I love that one too, because it's like, this is what I keep telling people the purpose of field reports are. Writing takes time. And so you have to make decisions as to what's important and what's not important. So if you have to tell somebody in your field reports, like, look, it's not the whole story, it takes too long to write, and this is the part that I put in there. You're flat out telling them that this is the part that mattered the most anyway. So even if you don't have enough time to get a full field report, it's exactly true. The stuff you wrote were the stuff you considered important. And so that's what gets addressed. And that's why I love the idea of like field reports. And then the last part, he approaches like, you're going to have to do this for yourself. You're going to have some agency. He goes, that's what I'm struggling with. You know, what's right or not has bothered me, which is another reason for my post. I've made some positive progress. I've seen some with my wife. So I wonder if any of this is necessary to instigate change. Yeah, continuous improvement is a necessity and self-reflection a requirement, but so is the calm embrace of humility and my overflowing ignorance. God, I hate how he writes like this. I don't really know if I'm right, but I won't really know it either. I need to quit worrying so much about it and just hold fast to my faith in God. And again, it's the most frustrating thing ever to have conversations with guys like this. This is why I stopped doing consults, because it's like you're not reaching the person. You're not having a conversation with the person. He just keeps saying the same things over and over. And Jack, you can tell he gets frustrated too. He's like, no, you seem receptive to everything I said, but this is not the conclusion I wanted you to draw. Like, look, a big reason why religious participation in contemporary Western society is because there's too much organized religion that promotes essentially a lack of agency. And he brings up a bunch of the quotes where the guy was saying that, like, by the grace of God, I started to change. I started praying to God for help, wisdom, strength, and protection as I head home. The opportunity to see God at work. I give thanks to the Holy Spirit. So like, you see all this shit that happens in your life, good or bad, is just because of God. Like you write just like you're a passive participant in your own life, but this whole act as best you can as a godly person and trust that God will make sure stuff happens philosophy may work for your religion, but then again, it's at odds with the red pill as a praxeological approach. And he's like, yeah, I don't know if I'm right. I don't know if I worry so much. Just have faith. He's like, oh, it's not a binary choice, man. You should adapt whatever you want for a red pill in your marriage. Excuse me. So this is not a binary choice. Adapt whatever you want for the red pill in your marriage. Have confidence that it's the right approach, but don't just assume you can trust in the process and everything will sort of magically work itself out. You have more agency than that. Like you started red pill with a smug arrogance that made you literally unable to comprehend your own bitterness. And it was a good move to do some sort of self-reflection and say, you know what? I'm having some really negative interactions with my wife now. I should think about this more. But the conclusion should not be, I don't know anything because the only one who knows about this is Jesus. So really that's more important than anything I do, red pill or otherwise. So like, again, he repeats, it's like, dude, you have more agency than that. And you need to act like you do. Otherwise, this is just going to be a fucking mess. And I can tell you're deep in your faith, so you're likely going to have to reject what he's about to say wholesale, but here it goes anyway. And this is the part that was kind of neat. Like, I really wish the old report was here. So I guess in the original one, the guy's like, my issues included porn use, video games, anger, and lack of career success. I realized my need for a savior and embraced the gospel of Jesus' resurrection. And by the grace of God, I started to change. Like, your real problems were addictive behavior of consumptive activities and an emotional immaturity that caused you to struggle with regulating your emotions. Some people think 12-step programs are laced with too much religion, especially the step that says you should put faith in a higher power. But what it's just saying is, accept that the reality in your mind does not trump actual reality. Denial over addictive and consumptive behavior is all fueled by the delusion that it's not destructive and damaging behavior after all. You notice he didn't say addictive? I don't think he did. Yeah, addictive, but not addiction. Thank you. Yeah, and you're just a perfectly healthy and functioning, productive individual, and it's not really a problem. Like, having faith in a higher power needs to be a metaphor that you recognize there's an actual reality out there. One where you're a destructive addict, harming yourself and your loved ones with your behavior, and willingly acknowledged that all this faith in a higher power has to mean that. I wish I could put that on a frame, man. Add that to merch. Put that in a coffee cup. It's another thing, too, about the Whisper article that Rollo and I quote all the time, where that's the other thing. There's a moral objectivism, but then there is a subjective nature of all this shit. What do they call it? Moral relativism. Oh, truth. Objective reality versus a subjective reality. In reality, there's just one reality. There's a truth. There's things that happen that are more or less predictable. Makes it more true or less true. And when a lot of guys argue about, like, they use the God, like God's plan, explain God's way, talking about yourself like you're a passive member in it, it kind of treats it as like truth as if it's a quotified experience. And it's not the case. But a lot of guys like living that lie. We're kind of hardwired to believe in lies. The only difference is we used to only believe in lies that were useful because lies that weren't useful tended to get us killed. But now we don't die anymore, so we can believe all kinds of nonsense. I've just described Q to you in like a hot minute. And he's saying all this because the next step is acknowledgement. Actually doing something about this is all in your own agency. Now you took that metaphor to a very religious, literal end, and if that's what you needed to do to really grasp the severity of your behavior and modify it, then whatever, more power to you. But you seem to keep mixing up your own agency with God's. You found a mental framework that explicitly said things like wrath, your emotional anger, and lust, your porn addiction, were bad things. You adopted it and your life improved. But, and this is the problem with people that really get into religion, or yoga, or fucking CrossFit, or even red pill, that it get exposed to a philosophy or a praxeology that essentially just says, consumptive behaviors are bad. And so you stop doing them and your life improves because you remove those behaviors. And then you generally end up replacing them with productive behaviors. And it's as simple as that. So, like, dude. I say this because you should recognize, at least at some level, that your life didn't get better because God helped you stop compulsively jacking off to porn. Your life got better because you stopped jacking off to porn, because you stopped jacking off to porn. And while I wouldn't say you deserve a medal for that, I attribute all the credit to you. So if you really need to attribute credit to God, give the big guy credit for providing a mental framework that made it possible, that's great. But the actual doing of it, that was all you. And that's the problem with anyone that seems like a fanatic, whether it's Christianity or CrossFit. They decide to surrender all agency to their new cause, which means they are still acting with a complete lack of agency. Not much different than their own pre-cause behavior. They followed the gospel, some good stuff happened, so they think now if they keep following the gospel and the bad stuff starts happening, well, they must not be following the gospel correctly, or the gospel actually intended for this bad stuff to happen too, and this is why those things get labeled a cult. Because it's one of the few short steps from that line of thinking into sounding like a brainwashed, smug son of a bitch. And if you want to take this approach to your Christian life, there's 2,000 years of history of billions of people doing this, so I'm not going to talk you out of it. I am suggesting that for the red pill, you do not do this. Have confidence your approach is working, but also recognize your approach is a subjective conclusion and you may want to modify it. Don't embrace your ignorance. You're not ignorant. Just embrace you came from a place of ignorance, which means that you'll be spending a lot of time on an iterative process as you continue to get less ignorant and comprehend what red pill works for you and what doesn't. As your initial conclusions or execution may be wrong, but it's entirely within your agency to decide and act on that. Now, this is a nuanced line of thinking that is at odds with how you're used to considering your religious faith, which is why I'm writing yet another 1,000 words here, because mostly we have our share of guys on the married red pill struggling between religious faith and red pill. And I think the root reason is this. Like, look, if you want to believe in an afterlife and assume you'll be judged after death and therefore want to give up any agency in that respect, sure. But I would not recommend that attitude to literally anything else in your life, not red pill, not otherwise. I love this because it's like, I'm sure you guys have seen me talking online before where you'll get some goofy feminist or some tradcon or that upstream Twitter stuff that happened before. Basically a bunch of people that's like, these guys are a cult, these guys are cult leaders, they just want to brainwash you and blah, 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 blah. And this is why I kind of laugh at those, because like this is 6 years old. And it's not the oldest example, it's just the oldest example for me. We've been doing this for years. We've already been through this mental masturbation process. We've made it very clear why acting in that lack of agency, cult-like behavior is not beneficial. So even if we wanted to, there is nothing red-pilled about it, because it's all about agency. I refer to it as an OODA loop for a specific reason, because you have to actually have agency the entire way through the process. You can't just say, God will provide. No, you have to observe. You can't just say, God will tell me what to do. It's like, no, you have to orient. You can't say, God will do it for me. It's like, no, you got to decide and you've got to act. And you got to keep doing this. And you're going to get a lot of guys who gave you a lot of information. Hey, this stuff worked for me. That stuff worked for me. From an evil psych perspective, this stuff is useful. This stuff makes sense from a historical perspective. There's even a bunch of guys who are like, yeah, I watched Mad Men last weekend and the writer told me this was good. Like, so you're going to get all kinds of notes. Some are more useful than others, but they're all in there. And then you take them as a holistic group of notes, and they're all kind of pointing in a very similar direction. But if you're not applying it in that way, you're wasting your time. To which I would argue, I'm putting out a red-pilled coffee video every now and again where I'm shitting on some whammon being a bad whammon. Feel free, subsidize the other guys who get it and give a fuck, because other than that, you're only doing yourself a disservice. And if it's not me, it's going to be somebody else monetizing that lack of agency, that need for camaraderie, and that need to be told you're right and they are wrong. And I don't know about you guys, but if your problem was you were simping for girls and they weren't sleeping with you, you were simping for your wife and she didn't love you and then she left and took the kids, if you're just going to exchange that simping to some YouTube content creator throwing out a Gumroad course, then you really haven't learned anything at all. And I think it's Abraham Lincoln that said, "A fool and his money are soon parted." So take this for what it's worth, man. Anyways, I'm going to end it off on that one. There's a lot to process on this. It took a lot longer than I thought it would, but whatever. I hope you had fun, and I will catch you guys on the next episode. Cheers.